The sound of hoofbeats echoed across the dusty plains as a stagecoach rolled into the small town of Silverwater, Colorado. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the main street where Rylan Vance stood frozen. His whiskey glass suspended halfway to his lips as he caught sight of the woman stepping down from the carriage, a woman he'd never expected to see again, and certainly not with a small boy clutching her hand. The year was 1877, and Rylan had spent the past 6 years convincing himself that Dahlia Reynolds was nothing but a distant memory. A ghost from his past that would eventually fade away like the setting sun over the western horizon. He'd almost succeeded, too, burying himself in hard work at his ranch and keeping mostly to himself, save for occasional trips into town for supplies and perhaps a drink or two at the Silverwater saloon. Rylan set his glass down on the wooden bar with a deliberate slowness, ignoring the curious glance from Tom, the bartender who'd served him countless drinks over the years. Through the grimy window of the saloon, he watched as Dahlia helped the boy down from the stagecoach. The child couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with a mop of dark hair that caught the wind as he gazed around at the town with wide-eyed curiosity. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Vance," Tom commented, wiping down the bar with a rag that had seen better days. "Maybe I have," Rylan murmured, reaching for his hat. He placed a coin on the counter and stepped outside into the warm June air, his spurs jingling with each step as he approached the stagecoach. Dahlia hadn't seen him yet. She was busy instructing the driver about her luggage 2 worn leather trunks that had been secured to the top of the coach. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, but a few strands had escaped to frame her face, a face that had haunted Rylan's dreams for years. She wore a simple blue traveling dress, dusty from the journey but still more elegant than the rough attire of most frontier women. The boy spotted Rylan first, tugging on his mother's hand and pointing. Dahlia turned, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still as her green eyes locked with Rylan's blue ones across the dusty street. "Dahlia," he said, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the bustling town. She straightened her shoulders, clutching the boy's hand tighter. "Rylan. I didn't expect to run into you so soon." "It's a small town," he replied, taking a few steps closer. He tipped his hat awkwardly, unsure of the proper etiquette for greeting a woman who had once promised to be his wife before disappearing from his life without explanation. "What brings you back to Silverwater?" Before Dahlia could answer, the boy stepped forward, staring up at Rylan with curious eyes, familiar eyes that sent a jolt through Rylan's chest. "Are you Rylan Vance?" the child asked, his voice clear and confident. Rylan nodded, unable to speak as he stared at the boy's face, seeing features that reminded him of his own father, of himself as a child. The boy extended his small hand formally. "My name is James Vance. Mama says you're my pa." Rylan couldn't speak. His throat closed up as the words hit him like a physical blow. He looked from the boy to Dahlia, whose face had paled slightly, though her chin remained lifted in that stubborn way he remembered so well. "James," she said gently, "why don't you go with Mr. Parker here and help him with our bags?" "I need to speak with Mr. Vance privately." The boy James looked reluctant but nodded, following the stagecoach driver to retrieve their belongings. "You have some explaining to do," Rylan said, finding his voice at last. It came out harsher than he intended, rough with emotion. Dahlia nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I know, and I will explain everything, Rylan, but not here in the middle of the street." Rylan glanced around, suddenly aware of the curious looks they were attracting from townspeople. Silverwater thrived on gossip, and this would certainly give them something to talk about for weeks. "Fine," he said. "The hotel's just down the street. We can talk there." "Thank you," Dahlia replied, and something in her voice, a vulnerability he rarely heard from her, made his anger falter slightly. They walked in tense silence to the Silverwater Hotel, a 2-story building that was the pride of the small town. James rejoined them, walking between the adults with curious glances back and forth. Rylan couldn't stop staring at the boy at his son. The resemblance was unmistakable now that he looked closely. James had Dahlia's nose and mouth, but his eyes and jawline were all Vance. Inside the hotel lobby, Rylan spoke briefly with the proprietor, Mrs. Hanson, who gave Dahlia a curious look, but arranged for a private sitting room where they could talk. James was entrusted to Mrs. Hanson's teenage daughter, who promised to show him the hotel's small garden and perhaps find him a cookie from the kitchen. Once alone, the silence between them grew heavy with unspoken words and years of absence. "He's mine," Rylan said finally. It wasn't a question. Dahlia nodded, removing her gloves and setting them on the small table between them. "Yes, he'll be 6 in September." Rylan did the calculation quickly. "You were already carrying him when you left." "I was," she admitted, meeting his gaze steadily. "I didn't know it at the time. I found out about a month after I arrived in St. Louis. And you didn't think to write, to tell me I had a son." Rylan's voice rose slightly, and he made an effort to control it, conscious of the thin walls of the hotel, Dahlia's hands twisted in her lap. "I wanted to, many times, but it was." "Complicated, Rylan. Complicated?" He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "What's complicated about telling a man he has a child? I've missed nearly 6 years of his life, Dahlia, years I can never get back." "I know," she whispered, and for the first time he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "And I'm sorry for that, more sorry than you can know, but I had my reasons." "I'm listening," Rylan said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms over his chest. Dahlia took a deep breath. "When I left Silverwater, I was running from more than just our argument. My father was in trouble, serious trouble with some dangerous men in St. Louis. He'd written to me begging for help. I couldn't tell you because I knew you'd insist on coming with me, and these weren't the kind of men who would hesitate to kill anyone who got in their way." Rylan frowned. "Your father, the same father who disowned you for marrying beneath your station, that father." "Yes," Dahlia said with a sad smile. "Despite everything, he was still my father, and he was desperate. When I arrived in St. Louis, I found him deep in debt to a man named Victor Hawkins, a criminal who controlled half the city. When I discovered I was expecting, I was terrified that Hawkins would use the baby as leverage against me and my father." "So you kept my son a secret to protect him," Rylan said slowly. "And to protect you," Dahlia added. "Hawkins had men everywhere. If he had learned about you, about our connection—" "I could have helped," Rylan insisted. "I wasn't some helpless tenderfoot, Dahlia. I fought in the war. I could have protected you both." "And risked your life in the process," she countered. "I couldn't bear that, not when I'd already caused so much trouble. So I stayed, helping my father work off his debt to Hawkins. It took years, Rylan, years of careful planning, of saving every penny we could." "And your father, where is he now?" Dahlia's expression darkened. "He died last winter." "Pneumonia. With him gone and the debt finally settled, there was nothing keeping us in St. Louis. James had been asking about his father more and more, and I missed you. I missed Silverwater, so we came home." Rylan stood abruptly, walking to the window to look out at the town. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the buildings. "Home," he repeated. "Is that what this is to you? After all this time?" "It's the only place that ever felt like home," Dahlia said quietly. "I know I have no right to expect anything from you, Rylan. I know I hurt you terribly, but James deserves to know his father, and you deserve to know your son." Rylan turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "And what about us, Dahlia? What am I supposed to do with all this? You were going to be my wife. We had plans, a future. Then you vanished with barely a note, and now you're back with my son in tow, expecting. What exactly?" "I don't expect anything," she said, rising to her feet. "Only that you give James a chance to know you. As for us—" She hesitated. "That's up to you. I understand if you can't forgive me." Before Rylan could respond, there was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Hanson's daughter appeared with James, who was happily munching on a cookie. I hope I'm not interrupting, the girl said, but the little one was asking for his mama. James ran to Dahlia, chocolate smeared on his cheek. Mama, they have horses in the back. Real ones. Can I see them tomorrow? Dahlia smiled, kneeling to wipe his face with her handkerchief. Perhaps. We'll see what tomorrow brings. Rylan watched the interaction, his heart constricting at the easy affection between mother and son. When James turned to look at him, Rylan felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, pride, sorrow for the lost years, and a fierce, unexpected love. Mr. Vance, James said, suddenly shy, do you have horses too? Rylan knelt down to the boy's level. I do, quite a few actually. I have a ranch about 3 miles outside of town. James's eyes widened. A whole ranch, with cows and everything? Cattle, Rylan corrected with a small smile, and yes, about 200 head. And chickens and a few goats and one very lazy dog named Buck. Could I see it sometime? James asked hopefully. Rylan glanced up at Dahlia, who was watching them with an unreadable expression. If your mama says it's all right, I'd be happy to show you the ranch. Can we, Mama, please? James turned to Dahlia with pleading eyes. She hesitated only briefly. Of course. But for now, it's getting late, and we've had a long journey. We should get settled in our room. Rylan stood, clearing his throat. Where will you be staying? The hotel is fine for a night or two, but... I've arranged to rent Mrs. Wilson's old place, Dahlia said. She wrote that she's moved to Denver to live with her daughter, and the house has been sitting empty. We'll move in tomorrow. Rylan nodded, remembering the small but tidy house at the edge of town. It's a good place. Needs some work on the roof, though. I noticed it was sagging on the west side last time I rode past. I'll see to it, Dahlia said, lifting her chin slightly. Rylan hesitated, then said, I could take a look at it for you. I'm handy with repairs. Something like hope flickered in Dahlia's eyes. I'd appreciate that. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when James yawned widely. I should go, Rylan said. Let you both get some rest, but I'd like to. That is, would it be all right if I came by tomorrow to help with moving your things to the Wilson place? That would be kind of you, Dahlia said softly. As Rylan prepared to leave, James suddenly rushed forward and wrapped his arms around Rylan's legs in an impulsive hug. Good night, Pa, he said, the words sounding natural and right in his childish voice. Rylan's throat tightened as he gently patted the boy's back. Good night, James, he managed to say. He looked up to find Dahlia watching them, tears shimmering in her eyes. With a final nod to her, Rylan left the hotel and stepped into the gathering dusk. His mind was reeling as he untied his horse from the hitching post. A son. He had a son. And Dahlia was back in Silverwater, bringing with her all the feelings he'd tried so hard to bury. As he rode slowly back to his ranch, the stars beginning to appear in the vast Colorado sky, Rylan knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the promise of summer heat later in the day. Rylan had barely slept, his mind too full of thoughts of Dahlia and James. He rose before sunrise, as was his habit, and went about his morning chores with mechanical efficiency, his thoughts miles away in town. By mid-morning, he had saddled his horse and loaded a wagon with tools he might need for repairs at the Wilson place. His ranch foreman, a grizzled veteran named Ellis, watched him with curious eyes. Taking the day off, boss? Ellis asked, leaning against the barn door. Got some business in town, Rylan replied vaguely, securing a box of nails in the wagon. Ellis nodded slowly. Heard tell a stagecoach brought in some interesting visitors yesterday, woman and a boy. Rylan paused, then continued his work. News traveled fast in Silverwater. That's so. Folks are saying the woman looked mighty familiar to some. Especially to those who remember when you were courting that Reynolds girl before she up and left. Rylan straightened, fixing Ellis with a level stare. You got something to ask me directly, Ellis? The older man shrugged. Just wondering if I should expect you back tonight, or if you've got some catching up to do that might take a while. I'll be back, Rylan said, climbing onto the wagon seat. "Keep an eye on that new bull. He was looking restless yesterday." Ellis touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, but his knowing expression said more than words could. Rylan flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion toward town, his stomach nodding with anticipation and uncertainty. At the hotel, he found Dahlia and James already packed and waiting in the lobby. James's face lit up when he saw Rylan, and he ran forward eagerly. "Pa, you came. Do we get to see the ranch today?" Rylan felt a strange warmth at being called Pa so naturally by this boy he'd just met. "Not today, son. First, we need to get you and your mama settled in your new home." Dahlia approached more slowly, looking rested but still guarded. "Good morning, Rylan. Thank you for coming." "Said I would, didn't I?" he replied, then softened his tone. "The wagon's outside. We can load your trunks and be at the Wilson place in no time." With James chattering excitedly between them, they loaded the luggage and set off through town. Rylan was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople as they passed. Dahlia kept her eyes forward, her back straight, but he could sense her discomfort. "Town hasn't changed much," she commented as they passed the general store. "Some things have," Rylan replied. "Railroad's coming through next year, got a new schoolhouse built last summer. And Doc Peterson finally retired. Got a young doctor from back east now." "Is Mrs. Miller still running the dress shop?" Dahlia asked, a hint of nostalgia in her voice. "She is, though her daughter helps out more these days, arthritis in her hands." James, listening to this exchange with interest, piped up. "Did you know my mama incent? Louie made dresses for rich ladies. She's real good at it." Rylan glanced at Dahlia with surprise. "Is that so?" she nodded, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "It was a way to earn extra money. I learned from my mother before she passed. Mama made a dress for the governor's wife," James added proudly. "It had pearls and everything. You always did have clever hands," Rylan said softly, remembering how she used to mend his shirts with such precise, tiny stitches. They arrived at the Wilson house, a modest one-story structure with a small porch and a yard that had grown wild with weeds in Mrs. Wilson's absence. Rylan helped them unload their belongings, then spent the morning examining the roof while Dahlia and James began to settle inside. As he suspected, the roof needed significant repairs on the western side. By noon, he was hot and dusty from the work, but had made good progress. He climbed down the ladder to find James watching him with admiration. "Are you really fixing the whole roof by yourself?" the boy asked. Rylan smiled, ruffling James's dark hair. "That's what men do, son. We fix things that need fixing. Can I help? I'm strong for my age. Mama says so." "I bet you are," Rylan said. "Tell you what, you can hand me nails when I need them this afternoon, but first, let's see about some lunch." "I'm starving." They found Dahlia in the kitchen, which she had already organized with remarkable efficiency. She had prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold meat that she'd purchased from the general store that morning. "The roof looks bad," Rylan said as they ate. "I can patch it today, but it'll need a proper re-shingling before winter." "I appreciate your help," Dahlia said. "I can pay you for your time and materials." Rylan shook his head firmly. "I won't take money from you, Dahlia, not for this." "I don't want charity," she began, but he cut her off. "It's not charity when it's family," he said quietly, and saw her eyes widen slightly at the implication. After lunch, Rylan returned to the roof with James as his enthusiastic assistant, handing up nails and tools as needed. From his perch, Rylan could see Dahlia in the yard, clearing weeds and examining the small vegetable garden that had gone to seed. By late afternoon, the roof was patched well enough to withstand any summer storms, and Rylan had also fixed a loose shutter and a squeaky door hinge. As the sun began to lower in the sky, he knew he should return to the ranch, but found himself reluctant to leave. "Stay for supper," Dahlia said suddenly as he was washing up at the pump in the yard. "It's the least I can do after all your help today." Rylan hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Supper was a simple affair, but Dahlia had always been a good cook, and the meal reminded Rylan of evenings they'd shared years ago. James dominated the conversation, full of questions about the ranch, about Rylan's life, about everything he could think to ask. "Do you have any other children?" James asked innocently, causing both adults to freeze momentarily. "No," Rylan said gently. "You're my only child, James. Did you ever get married? Billy Thompson at school had a stepmother because his pa got married again after his first mama died." Dahlia looked uncomfortable, but Rylan answered honestly. "No, I never married." "Why not?" James persisted. "Didn't you want to?" "James," Dahlia said warningly. "That's enough questions for now. It's nearly your bedtime." The boy looked disappointed but didn't argue. After helping clear the table, he allowed his mother to lead him to the small second bedroom that had been prepared for him. Rylan waited in the main room, standing awkwardly by the fireplace, examining the few personal items Dahlia had already set out: a small clock, a book of poetry he remembered she had loved, a daguerreotype of her parents in a silver frame. When she returned, she looked tired but content. "He's so excited he could barely settle down. He talks about you constantly." "He's a fine boy, Dahlia. You've done well with him." She smiled softly. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." She hesitated, then added, "He's been asking about you his whole life, you know." "I never hid from him that he had a father. I told him stories about you, how brave you were, how kind." "Even after how things ended between us?" Rylan asked, surprised. Dahlia moved to stand beside him at the fireplace. "I never blamed you for our argument, Rylan. I was young and stubborn, and so were you. And then circumstances forced us apart even further. But I never wanted James to think his father was anything less than a good man." Rylan turned to face her fully. "Why did you really come back, Dahlia? The truth." She met his gaze steadily. "For James, yes, but also for me. Because despite everything, despite all the years and distance, I never stopped loving you, Rylan Vance. I don't expect you to feel the same, not after what I did. But that's the truth." Rylan's heart pounded in his chest. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek gently. "I tried to hate you," he admitted. "When you first left, I was so angry I couldn't see straight. I rode out to the cliffs where we used to picnic and shouted your name until my voice gave out. But even then, even at my angriest, I couldn't stop loving you." Dahlia's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," he said softly, "but you have it anyway. We've lost 6 years, Dahlia. I don't want to lose any more time." He leaned forward, his intention clear, but hesitated just before their lips met, giving her a final chance to pull away. Instead, Dahlia closed the distance herself, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt both familiar and entirely new. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally separated, both breathing a little harder, Rylan rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's getting late, and Ellis will be wondering where I am." "Will you come back tomorrow?" Dahlia asked, her hands still resting on his chest. "Try and stop me," Rylan replied with a smile. "I promised James I'd show him the ranch, remember? Maybe you could both come out for the day, pack a picnic, make a proper outing of it." "I'd like that," Dahlia said, her eyes shining with happiness that made her look like the young woman he'd fallen in love with years ago. Rylan kissed her once more, then forced himself to leave, knowing that if he stayed any longer, he might not have the willpower to go at all. As he drove the wagon back to his ranch under a sky full of stars, he felt lighter than he had in years, as if a weight he'd been carrying had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The next few weeks passed in a blur of rekindled emotions and new discoveries. True to his word, Rylan took Dahlia and James to the ranch the day after they moved into the Wilson house. James was beside himself with excitement, running from the barn to the corrals to the chicken coop, wanting to see everything at once. Ellis had raised an eyebrow at the sight of Dahlia, but had greeted her politely. The other ranch hands were curious but respectful, recognizing the significant change in their usually solitary boss as he proudly showed his son around the property. "This will all be yours someday," Rylan told James as they stood on a rise overlooking the pastures where the cattle grazed. "The Vance ranch has been in our family for 3 generations now." James had looked up at him with wide eyes. "Really? Mine?" "Really," Rylan confirmed, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. He glanced at Dahlia, who was watching them with a soft expression. "It's your birthright." In the days that followed, Rylan split his time between his ranch duties and helping Dahlia and James settle into life in Silverwater. He repaired the sagging porch steps, cleared the overgrown garden so Dahlia could plant vegetables, and built James a small wooden horse that the boy treasured. The townspeople gradually adjusted to Dahlia's return and the revelation of James's parentage. There was gossip, of course whispers behind hands and curious glances, but most people in Silverwater had always liked Dahlia, and they couldn't help but be charmed by James's enthusiasm and Rylan's obvious devotion to his newfound family. Dahlia, for her part, began to establish herself in the community once more. She started taking in sewing work, her reputation from St. Louis preceding her as women in town discovered her skill with a needle. She joined the Church Ladies' Auxiliary and volunteered to help with the town's upcoming Independence Day celebration. One evening, about a month after their return, Rylan arrived at the house to find Dahlia sitting on the porch, a troubled expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, settling beside her on the bench. "I received a letter today," she said, handing him a folded piece of paper. "From St. Louis." Rylan opened it, skimming the elegant handwriting. "It's from someone named Eleanor Hawkins. Victor Hawkins's widow," Dahlia explained. "He died 3 months ago, shot during a business dispute." Rylan continued reading, his expression darkening. "She says she found papers in her husband's office about you and your father, and about James." He looked up sharply. "She's threatening to send men after you if you don't pay what she claims your father still owed." Dahlia nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "I thought it was over, Rylan. When my father died and Hawkins agreed the debt was settled, I thought we were free." "Do you think she's bluffing?" "I don't know," Dahlia admitted. "Eleanor was always cold, calculating. She might just be trying to extort money from me, or she might genuinely believe my father still owed them. Either way, I'm afraid." Rylan took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Where's James?" "Inside, playing with that wooden horse you made him. I didn't want him to see how upset I was." Rylan nodded, thinking quickly. "How much is she asking for?" $500, money I don't have. My savings were just enough to get us here and rent the house." "I have it," Rylan said immediately. "The ranch is doing well. I can get that much together." Dahlia shook her head firmly. "No, Rylan, I won't let you pay my father's debts. This is my problem to solve." "It's our problem," he corrected gently. "You and James are my family." "Your problems are my problems now." Tears welled in Dahlia's eyes. "I never wanted to bring trouble to your door. That's why I stayed away so long." "And look what that cost us," Rylan said, his voice rough with emotion. 6 years apart. 6 years I'll never have with my son." "I won't lose either of you again, Dahlia. Not to Hawkins, not to anyone." He stood, pacing the small porch as he thought. "We have options. We could pay her off, though there's no guarantee she won't come back for more. We could go to the law sheriff. Tanner is a good man, and he might be able to get the authorities in St. Louis involved." "Or," Dahlia prompted, sensing there was more. Rylan turned to her, his expression resolute. "Or we could face this head-on, go to St. Louis ourselves, confront Eleanor Hawkins directly, find out what evidence she really has, and settle this once and for all." "Go back to St. Louis." Dahlia looked uncertain. "That would be dangerous, Rylan. The Hawkins family has connections throughout the city." "So do you," he pointed out. "You said you made dresses for the governor's wife, among others. Surely some of your clients would vouch for you, help establish that your father's debt was settled legitimately." Dahlia considered this, hope beginning to replace the fear in her eyes. Mrs. Harrington, the governor's wife, was always kind to me, and Judge Wilson's daughter was a regular client. They might help. Then that's what we'll do, Rylan decided. We'll go to St. Louis, gather support from your former clients, and confront Alina Hawkins together. Show her that you're not alone anymore. What about James? I can't take him back there. It's too dangerous. He can stay with Ellis and his wife at the ranch, Rylan suggested. They raised 5 children of their own. They'll take good care of him for a week or 2. Dahlia stood, moving to Rylan's side and taking his hands in hers. You would do this for me, risk so much. For you, he said seriously. For James, for us, yes, I would risk everything. She leaned up and kissed him softly. Then we'll go to St. Louis together. The plan was set in motion quickly. Rylan arranged for James to stay at the ranch with Ellis and his wife, Martha, who was delighted at the prospect of having a child in the house again. James was excited about the adventure of staying at the ranch, though he was confused about why his parents had to leave. We have some business to take care of in St. Louis, Dahlia explained as she packed a small trunk. Important grown-up business, but we'll be back before you know it. Promise? James asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. Promise, Rylan said firmly, kneeling to look his son in the eye. And when we get back, maybe we'll talk about you coming to live at the ranch permanently. How would you like that? James's eyes widened. With the horses and Buck the dog. Every day, Rylan confirmed, glancing up at Dahlia, who nodded with a smile. Can Mama come too? James asked innocently. Rylan's eyes held Dahlia's as he answered, That's what I'm hoping, son, that's what I'm hoping. They left on the eastbound train the next morning, having secured tickets all the way to St. Louis. The journey would take several days, with multiple changes of trains along the way. As Silverwater disappeared behind them, Dahlia's hand found Rylan's, their fingers intertwining on the seat between them. Are you nervous? He asked quietly. Terrified, she admitted. But also relieved in a way. No more running, no more secrets. Whatever happens in St. Louis, we'll face it together. Rylan squeezed her hand. Together, he agreed. The train journey gave them time to really talk about the years they'd spent apart. Dahlia told Rylan about her life in St. Louis, about the small apartment she'd shared with her father, about the dressmaking business she'd built from nothing to support them both and pay down her father's debt to Hawkins. It wasn't all bad, she said as they watched the landscape change outside the window. James brought me so much joy, even in the darkest times, and I found I had a talent for dressmaking that I never knew about before. You always were good with your hands, Rylan said with a smile. I remember that quilt you made for my birthday before you left. I still have it. Dahlia looked surprised. You kept it, even after. Couldn't bring myself to get rid of it, he admitted. It was the last thing you gave me. In turn, Rylan told her about his struggles after she left, the anger, the confusion, the loneliness. How he'd thrown himself into expanding the ranch, driving himself and his men hard to keep his mind occupied. How he'd considered selling everything and moving away, starting fresh somewhere else, but couldn't bring himself to leave the only connection he had to her. I courted a couple of women over the years, he confessed. Nothing serious, just attempts to move on that never felt right. I never even tried, Dahlia said softly. There was never anyone for me but you, Rylan, even when I thought I'd never see you again. By the time they arrived in St. Louis, they had reconnected in ways that went beyond physical attraction or shared history. They had learned who they had become in the years apart, stronger, more resilient versions of the young people they had once been. St. Louis was just as Dahlia remembered it, bustling, crowded, the air thick with smoke from factories and riverboats. They checked into a modest hotel near the river, and Dahlia immediately set about contacting her former clients and friends who might help their cause. To her relief, many remembered her fondly and were willing to assist. Mrs. Harrington, the governor's wife, was particularly helpful, providing a letter stating that, to her knowledge, Gerald Reynolds had settled his debts honorably before his death. Judge Wilson agreed to meet with them personally to discuss the legal ramifications of Alina Hawkins's threats. "The judge believes we have a strong case," Dahlia told Rylan after returning from that meeting. "Especially since I have the signed document from Victor Hawkins stating that the debt was paid in full. Alina may have found other papers, but this is the most recent and binding one." "Good," Rylan said, relieved. "When do we confront her?" "Tomorrow morning. The judge has arranged for us to meet at his office. He'll be present as a neutral third party." That night, in their hotel room, with the sounds of the city drifting through the partially open window, Rylan held Dahlia close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he whispered, "know that I love you. I never stopped loving you." Dahlia turned in his arms to face him. "I love you too, Rylan. Always have, always will." The next morning, they dressed with care, Dahlia in her best blue dress, Rylan in the only suit he owned, purchased specifically for this trip. They made an impressive pair as they entered Judge Wilson's office, where Alina Hawkins was already waiting, a thin, elegant woman with cold eyes and a permanent frown. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said coolly, deliberately using Dahlia's maiden name. "How unexpected to see you back in St. Louis." And with company, no less. "This is Rylan Vance," Dahlia introduced, her voice steady. "James's father, my fiancé." Rylan's head turned sharply at this, but he quickly recovered, extending his hand to Alina. "Mrs. Hawkins, I understand you've been threatening my family." Alina ignored his hand. "Family? How quaint. The cowboy, the runaway, and their bastard child. Is that what passes for family out west?" Judge Wilson cleared his throat sternly. "Mrs. Hawkins, that's quite enough. We're here to discuss a legal matter, not exchange insults." "Of course, Judge," Alina said smoothly, seating herself with exaggerated grace. "Let's discuss how Gerald Reynolds swindled my husband out of $500 before he died." "That's a lie," Dahlia said firmly, producing a folded document from her reticule. "Here is the receipt, signed by your husband himself, acknowledging that my father's debt was paid in full." Alina barely glanced at the paper. Forged, obviously. Victor would never have released Gerald from his obligations so easily. "The signature has been verified by a handwriting expert," Judge Wilson said, tapping the document. "It is genuine, Mrs. Hawkins. Furthermore, I have affidavits from several reputable citizens attesting to Mr. Reynolds's character and his efforts to settle all his debts before his passing." Alina's expression hardened. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Judge. My husband may be gone, but his business associates remain very much alive and active in this city. They have interests to protect." "Are you threatening a judge, Mrs. Hawkins?" Rylan asked quietly, his voice dangerous. For the first time, Alina seemed to truly see him, to recognize something in his stance and expression that gave her pause. "Not at all, Mr. Vance. Merely stating facts." "Here's another fact for you," Rylan said, leaning forward slightly. "Dahlia and James are under my protection now. Any threat against them is a threat against me. And while I may be just a cowboy from Colorado, I fought in the war. I know how to handle threats." Alina's eyes narrowed, but Judge Wilson intervened before she could respond. "I believe we've established that legally the debt was settled. Mrs. Hawkins, I strongly advise you to cease any harassment of Mrs. Reynolds and her family. If you persist, I will be forced to involve the proper authorities." For a long moment, Alina seemed to be weighing her options. Finally, she stood, gathering her expensive shawl around her shoulders. "Very well, I will consider the matter closed on one condition." "Which is?" Dahlia asked warily. "That you never return to St. Louis again," Alina said coldly. "This city has enough problems without adding yours to the mix." Dahlia exchanged a glance with Rylan, who nodded slightly. "Agreed," she said. "We have no intention of returning. Our home is in Colorado now." Alina gave a curt nod and swept from the room without another word. Judge Wilson sighed heavily once she was gone. "I'd take her agreement with a grain of salt, Mrs. Reynolds." Eleanor Hawkins is not known for her honesty or her forgiveness, but I believe you've won this round. She knows she has no legal standing, and with your formidable fiancé by your side, she may think twice about pursuing the matter further. Thank you, Judge, Dahlia said sincerely, for everything. Outside on the street, Rylan pulled Dahlia into a quiet alcove between buildings. Fiancé, huh, he said with a raised eyebrow. Dahlia blushed. I'm sorry, it just came out. I thought it might lend more legitimacy to our situation. I'm not complaining, Rylan said, his eyes warm as they studied her face. But if you're going to call me your fiancé, maybe we should make it official. Dahlia's breath caught. Rylan. He took her hands in his. I know this isn't the most romantic setting, and I don't have a ring yet, but I love you, Dahlia Reynolds. I've loved you for years, even when I thought I'd never see you again. Will you marry me? For real this time? Tears filled Dahlia's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you, Rylan Vance. He kissed her then, right there on the street in St. Louis, not caring who might see or what they might think. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Rylan rested his forehead against hers. Let's go home, he said. To our son. To our future. Dahlia nodded, her heart too full for words. Hand in hand, they walked back to their hotel to pack for the journey west, back to Silverwater, back to James, back to the life they were finally free to build together. The return journey to Colorado seemed to pass more quickly than the trip east, perhaps because this time they were heading toward something rather than away from it. Dahlia spent much of the time sketching designs in a small notebook, plans for their wedding, ideas for expanding the house at the ranch to accommodate her and James, even rough drawings of a dress shop she hoped to open in Silverwater eventually. You've got it all figured out, haven't you? Rylan teased as he watched her work, her pencil moving quickly across the paper. Not everything, she admitted with a smile, but the important parts, the rest we'll figure out together. When they finally arrived back in Silverwater, they were met at the station by Ellis, who had brought James to town to welcome them home. The boy ran to them as soon as he spotted them, flinging himself into their arms with such force that Rylan had to brace himself to keep from toppling over. You came back, James exclaimed, his arms wrapped tightly around Dahlia's neck. I knew you would. Of course we did, Rylan said, ruffling his son's hair. We promised, didn't we? Did you fix the bad business? James asked, looking between them with serious eyes. Dahlia nodded. Yes, sweetheart. Everything's fixed now. We don't have to worry about St. Louis anymore. Ellis approached more slowly, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. Good to have you back, boss. The boy's been a delight, but he's been missing his parents something fierce. Parents, Rylan repeated, savoring the word. He looked at Dahlia, who was beaming at him over James's head. Ellis, I'd like you to be the first to know. Dahlia has agreed to be my wife. Ellis's smile widened. Well, it's about time. Martha will be thrilled. She's already cleaned out the main house from top to bottom, getting ready for a woman's touch, she says. Are we really going to live at the ranch now? James asked excitedly. If that's what you want, Dahlia said, setting him down but keeping hold of his hand. More than anything. The boy declared. Ellis showed me how to feed the chickens, and Martha let me help make biscuits, and Buck sleeps right by my bed every night, Rylan laughed, lifting James onto his shoulders. Sounds like you've made yourself right at home, son. They collected their luggage and Ellis's wagon, then made their way through town toward the ranch. As they passed the general store, Mrs. Peterson, the owner's wife, waved enthusiastically. Welcome back, she called. Any news from your trip? Rylan and Dahlia exchanged a glance. We're getting married, Dahlia called back, unable to contain her happiness. Mrs. Peterson clapped her hands together. Wonderful, when's the wedding? Soon, Rylan answered. Very soon. Indeed, they wasted no time. 2 weeks later, on a perfect summer day, Rylan Vance and Dahlia Reynolds were married in the small church in Silverwater. James stood proudly at his father's side, dressed in a new suit that matched Rylan's. Dahlia wore a simple but elegant dress of ivory silk that she had made herself, with lace she'd brought back from St. Louis specifically for the occasion. The entire town turned out for the celebration. Even those who had once gossiped about Dahlia's sudden departure and equally sudden return now wished the couple well, won over by their obvious devotion to each other and by James's infectious excitement about having his family complete at last. After the ceremony and a reception at the town hall, the new family returned to the ranch, their home. Martha had indeed prepared the main house beautifully, adding touches of comfort and elegance that had been missing during Rylan's bachelor years. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, colorful quilts adorned the beds, and vases of wildflowers brightened every room. That night, after James had been tucked into his new bedroom, a room Rylan had spent the past 2 weeks preparing, building shelves for his books and toys, painting the walls a cheerful blue, the newlyweds stood on the porch, looking out over their land as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Happy?" Rylan asked, his arm around Dahlia's waist. "Completely," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It feels like a dream." "If it is, I don't ever want to wake up," he replied, turning to kiss her softly. The years that followed were not without challenges. Running a ranch was hard work, and adding a dress shop in town, which Dahlia opened the following spring, meant busy days and sometimes sleepless nights. James grew like a weed, developing his father's talent with horses and his mother's artistic eye. He started school in town, making friends quickly with his outgoing nature and adventurous spirit. They never heard from Alina Hawkins again, though occasionally Dahlia would receive a letter from one of her former clients in St. Louis, keeping her connected to the life she'd left behind. But those connections grew less important as her roots in Silverwater deepened. 2 years after their wedding, Dahlia gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, a beautiful child with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. James took his role as big brother seriously, proudly showing Rose around the ranch as soon as she could walk, teaching her the names of the animals, protecting her from any perceived danger. Life settled into a rhythm of work and love, challenges and triumphs. The railroad came to Silverwater as predicted, bringing new opportunities and new faces to town. Dahlia's dress shop flourished, especially after she secured a contract to provide costumes for a traveling theater company that began making regular stops in the growing town. Rylan expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and horses, hiring additional hands as needed. But no matter how busy they became, they always made time for each other and for their children. Sunday picnics by the creek, evening rides across the pastures, winter nights gathered around the fireplace telling stories, these became the foundations of their family life. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Rylan surprised Dahlia with a special gift, the deed to a plot of land in town where she could build a proper shop of her own, rather than continuing to rent space. "You've made my dreams come true," she told him that night as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom. "All of them." "Not yet," he said with a smile she could hear in his voice even if she couldn't see it in the dark, "but I'm working on it." 7 years after their reunion, as they celebrated James's 13th birthday, Dahlia announced that they would need to prepare the nursery again. Rose would be getting a sibling in the spring. The news was met with jubilation from the entire family, especially James, who declared that this time he wanted a brother to even things out. "You know, we never did get around to having that picnic at the cliffs," Rylan said to Dahlia one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rose playing with her dolls at their feet while James practiced roping a fence post in the yard. "The cliffs?" Dahlia asked, confused for a moment, then smiled as the memory returned. "Where you used to take me courting, before I left," Rylan nodded. "I think it's time we went back there, as a family." And so, on a perfect autumn day, the Vance family packed a picnic lunch and rode out to the sandstone cliffs that overlooked the valley where their ranch lay. James raced ahead on his pony, while Rose rode with her father, shrieking with delight at every bump and dip in the trail. Dahlia, beginning to show with their third child, rode at a more sedate pace beside them. At the top of the cliffs, they spread a blanket and unpacked their lunch. As they ate, Rylan told the children stories of how he and their mother had come to these cliffs when they were younger, how he had proposed to her the first time right on this spot, how they had planned their future together, looking out over this same view. "And then Mama had to go away for a while," James said, familiar with the simplified version of their story that they'd shared with the children. "That's right," Dahlia said, reaching out to smooth her son's hair, now as dark and thick as his father's. "But I came back. With me." James added proudly. "With you," Rylan confirmed, his arm around his son's shoulders. "The best surprise of my life." As the afternoon waned, James took Rose exploring along the safe part of the ridge, keeping a careful eye on his sister as they collected interesting rocks and leaves. Rylan and Dahlia remained on the blanket, his hand resting gently on her growing belly. "I used to come up here after you left," he confessed quietly. "I'd sit for hours, trying to understand why you'd gone, wondering where you were, if you were safe, if you were happy." Dahlia covered his hand with hers. "I'm so sorry for those years, Rylan, for the pain I caused you." "Don't be," he said, squeezing her hand. "I'm not anymore. Those years made us who we are now. They gave us James. They taught us not to take each other for granted." He paused, watching as James patiently showed Rose how to skip a stone across a small puddle left by recent rains. Everything worked out exactly as it was supposed to. Dahlia leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "When I came back to Silverwater, I was so afraid. Afraid you'd reject us, afraid you'd never forgive me, afraid we'd never recapture what we once had." "And now?" Rylan asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. She smiled, watching their children, her hand resting on her belly where their third child grew. "Now I know that what we have is better than anything we could have imagined back then. It's real. It's weathered storms. It's built on truth and forgiveness and second chances." "Second chances," Rylan repeated thoughtfully. "That day you stepped off the stagecoach with James. That was my second chance at life, at love, at everything that matters." "Mine too," Dahlia whispered. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. James and Rose returned to the blanket, chattering about their discoveries, their faces flushed with excitement and the crisp autumn air. As the family packed up to head back to the ranch before dark, Rylan paused for one last look at the view the valley spread out below them, their ranch visible in the distance, the future stretching out before them as vast and promising as the Colorado sky. "Ready to go home?" Dahlia asked, coming to stand beside him. Rylan smiled, taking her hand in his. "I am home," he said simply. "Wherever you and our children are, that's home." And as they made their way down the trail toward the ranch, toward the life they'd built together from the ashes of separation and misunderstanding, Rylan knew with absolute certainty that the woman he had once loved and lost, and found again, would be by his side for all the days to come. That the son who had once rendered him speechless with a simple introduction had given him a gift beyond measure. The chance to be a father, to pass on the Vance legacy, to watch his family grow and thrive in the land he loved. The sun set behind them as they rode, casting their shadows long before them on the trail, shadows that mingled and merged into one, just as their lives had done. And in that golden light of evening, with his family around him and the future bright before them, Rylan Vance knew that he had found something far more precious than any gold rush or cattle fortune. He had found his way home.